Welcome to State of Wellbeing, a podcast from South Dakota State University. The State of Wellbeing is a holistic well-being podcast with the goal of supporting the campus community as we strive to be a growing, high-performing, and healthy university.
Welcome back to another episode of the State of Wellbeing podcast. My name is Kevin Sackreiter. I am the Executive Director for the Center for Professional Enrichment and Teaching Excellence, and I'm excited to welcome our guest today as we dig in on the conversation of imposter syndrome. Stephen, do you want to introduce yourself to our audience?
Yeah, thanks for having me on, Kevin. I'm Stephen Miedema. I'm the Assistant Director of Career Education in the Office of Career Development here. I've been in the office here for going on 7 years. Actually, now I've been on campus working for about 10 years, and then before that, I was a student here too as well. So really excited to be on the podcast and talk about this issue that is one of those things that I think if you ask anybody, especially those who have been out in the workforce for a while, everyone has had a moment or some sort of an instance with imposter syndrome.
100%. And I'm excited to maybe get to share our own experiences with that topic in a little bit. But before we jump in, why don't we back up just a second? And what is this concept of imposter syndrome?
Yeah, imposter syndrome. So it's one of those things that we see manifest really throughout every industry. We'll see it, but especially we'll see it with our students in higher education, especially those students who are going into what we perceive as those fairly high achieving areas. Imposter syndrome, it's self-doubt about one's abilities and accomplishments compared to others.
Sure.
Even if you have that success and you have demonstrated examples of your own success. So it's those students who, they make an excuse for their success, or you go on and you find a lot of really good success. Say you're getting A's on all your assignments, but it was just a fluke that I got that. Or, I got a promotion. It was just a fluke that I got that promotion. I just got lucky.
Right.
And there isn't that maybe confidence in who you are as a person or in your own abilities. Even though you should have it, sometimes it's easier said than done to convince our own brains to, just trust that we are competent in what we're doing.
Right. Well, and it's not unusual, right? Like this is something that I think a lot of people, 30-year professionals continue to, that self-doubt creeps in. So I think that's maybe an important conversation to have. Is it's a very normal thing that people are encountering.
Absolutely, very normal, and we see it, across the board. Like I said, we'll have a student, athletics, right? You'll see athletes do that. Maybe it's a student who comes in. Oh, okay, well, I'm only here because I'm just bigger than everybody else. I'm not actually good at what I'm doing, or I'm here just because of this. And it's always making that excuse, right? So we're all successful. We're all great at what we do. We're all very competent. But the point of it is convincing ourselves to trust that we're going to continue to be a success, because as soon as we make that one mistake, then all of a sudden those thoughts start to creep back in of, okay, maybe I'm not actually as good as I am, and maybe I shouldn't be here, and maybe somebody else should be doing this instead.
They're going to find out that I don't know what I
Yes,
right?
Yep. When are they going to discover I'm the imposter, right? You look at what's the game the kids are playing now, Among Us, right? You got to find the imposter there. And so the idea of everyone makes mistakes.
Sure.
But what happens in imposter syndrome is we start to think, well, it's all right that they make mistakes. I mean, everybody makes mistakes.
Right.
But then when we start thinking about ourselves, it's like, well, I am a mistake. Like my success is a mistake too. Like I can't be doing any of this. And so that's where we got to just remember to kind of slow down and kind of take a step back.
Sure. So how does imposter syndrome, affect the individual, whether it's that role as a student, that role as a professional? Now that we know kind of what it is and we see the idea of they're going to catch me making those mistakes, but how does that start to affect you within your role as a student or as a professional?
Yeah, I think it really does affect it in kind of three different areas. The first area is before you're going in to do something. We see it with people with imposter syndrome. It tends to look a little bit more like anxiety before something,
Sure.
To where we'll have students who will over-prepare, or professionals who will over-prepare, and you'll do way more than you need to. You'll get every single little detail down to make sure you can do exactly what you need to do, and you're perfect at it. And then it comes time and you do it, and it goes great, but then afterwards you start thinking, oh, well, it was only because I put in all that effort.
Sure.
And then it turns into this feedback loop where it's like, okay, well, I got to make sure I put in even more effort next time.
Right.
And then oh no, if you make a mistake after putting in all that, well, that's where we can really see it to start to spiral out. And so that's where it comes into like that beforehand.
A lot of anxiety.
Yes. Yep. Yeah. We actually see that like anxiety and imposter syndrome. Some people say comorbidities, as in they go hand in hand together. There's some people who will say that imposter syndrome is a symptom of anxiety. I think there's a lot of things that go into that. To me, I think a lot of it is also just like confidence too that comes in there. Sure. But then it gets to time where the actual like performance, right, where you're starting to actually handle it, and you get in there, and it can be kind of a panic. Oh no, is there an adult in the room to help me?
Right.
But the reality is like for all of us, we're all the adults in the room. Right? Yeah, we're the ones who are supposed to be doing it. And whether there's somebody who maybe could be doing it better than you, or maybe somebody who has more experience with it, sometimes we have to just remind ourselves that doesn't matter, because we're the ones who are there and we're the ones who are actually doing it. And we can do a really good job with that. And so in the moment, it can really kind of sometimes paralyze us. Sometimes it can make us doubt what we're going to do, kind of hold our own brains hostage, when the reality is we just need to go through with it. And then we see like the final part of the imposter syndrome. It really comes out after the fact of you take that deep breath afterwards, you let out that breath, but then you think, oh no, I wasn't actually supposed to do that well. It was just a fluke. Oh, someone else, if we're thinking like athletes, for example, right? Okay, someone else, maybe they tripped and that's why I won the 100-meter relay or something there. And so what we're thinking is not that, oh, we did a good job. It's, oh, we did a job and we accidentally were successful. Sure. And that's where sometimes we have to really force ourselves to really take an objective evaluation of it and look at, well, what is it that we did? What is it that we could control? How do we do in that? And remember that, hey, when we actually did stuff, it worked out, and it's going to continue to work out in the future. And so it's some of it's just getting out of our own heads. And I think that's, really with most of these kind of concepts, it's getting out of your own way on it. Right. So
I like that message there of like, it worked out and it's going to continue to work out. Right. I really like that a lot. And I think it's a good perspective to kind of be sharing in general, So how have you seen imposter syndrome as kind of our imposter syndrome expert within this conversation? How have you seen imposter syndrome show up in your own personal, professional roles?
Yeah, imposter syndrome is one of those ones where for me it was I really think back to when I first started here at SDSU full-time. So what happened in my career is I did my master's in education from the Counseling and Human Resource Department here, kind of fluked my way into that program. I say that because I didn't really understand what program I was going into. I purely just picked a master's degree because I was trying to figure out my life still, which is a different conversation. We could get into major and career exploration for hours if you wanted me to. But as I was going through that, I needed an internship to be able to graduate. I started finding this career counseling. I really found it fascinating. I really got excited. So I got an internship in the Office of Career Development. Well, halfway through that internship, my supervisor quit. And so all of a sudden, I was just left there like by myself kind of doing that job, which was great. I loved it. I really enjoyed the work I was doing. I knew I was making a difference when I was working with those students. But then, graduation comes, it hits the summer. I'm sitting there all summer long. I'm waiting for them to post the job so that I can actually take over the job full time, maybe actually get a paycheck, right? Real exciting stuff. And it's not until October that they finally hire me in an emergency role at that point. Sure. And then they have to do the official search. And so I have to go through a second official search and apply for it and everything and go through the interviews. And it was really weird to where me at that time, I didn't understand how HR systems worked. I didn't understand why they're doing it. I thought it was because, well, is there something I'm doing wrong? Are they trying to find somebody else? Like, what else is happening? Maybe I shouldn't be here. Maybe they're trying to just get me to quit. Maybe they're trying to find somebody else. And then it comes time to the actual search and the interview, and I did well in the interview. Looking back, I did well in the interview. And I had been doing the job for almost a year at that point, and so I definitely knew what was going on. After the fact, I get hired. Somebody on the search committee didn't even mean to say in a negative way, was just talking about the search and about the things that happened and said, oh yeah, and then the other guy we brought in for the interview, he dropped out after the interview.
Oh, sure.
And so all of a sudden in my head it was, oh, I'm only here because the other guy quit.
I think we've all all been there. Yeah.
And oh my, did that mess with my head, especially when you start to get into it. Another part of imposter syndrome we can see is like the idea of belonging, the idea of like the stories that we see, the narratives that we see of who's around us. Well, I'm in, if we think counseling and we think student affairs, it's a fairly female dominated career. And when I was there and I was the only guy in the entire office and one of a handful of guys in the entire department, all of a sudden it was like, well, am I supposed to be here too? And then when I find out that somebody else had dropped out, and then it was like, oh, well, was I supposed to drop out? Am I supposed to be here? And that's easy to continue. And so then you start self-doubt, and then you kind of think about it. Luckily, or not so much luckily, pandemic happened shortly after that. And so all of a sudden it was, okay, well, life is just going to go crazy and I have to figure it out. And I could figure it out and, kind of get out of my own head because life forced me to. Sure. But looking back, it was like, if we hadn't had the pandemic, I was starting to get to a point where it's like, well, do I need to quit? Because I'm obviously not qualified for this. I can't be doing this job. Somebody else is going to be doing it better than me. Even though there's nothing, like my boss said I was doing a great job. I had a really great performance review, all of that stuff. But like, I didn't trust who I was and I didn't trust myself as a professional. And we see that too, right? Like my story is by no means unique there. We see that when it comes to, students graduating, getting their first job. We see it when it comes to students going to grad school, maybe becoming that TA where it's the previous year you were in that classroom. And then all of a sudden now you have to be teaching that. Right. Well, how does that work? Because you're maybe a year older, but you're expected to be the quote unquote adult in that room. Right. Well, you're definitely not the one who's the expert. The PhD is the expert.
100%. So when I graduated with my master's degree, I was fortunate enough to find a position teaching at Northern up in Aberdeen. And I had just the semester before taken a 600 level, whatever, rhetorical criticism course. And I got the job in Aberdeen at Northern, and I was teaching the 400 level rhetorical criticism course the first fall out of graduate school. And talk about imposter syndrome. I mean, I think every day there was self-doubt and students older than me in my classroom. And I think that was one of those things where I had to continually coach myself up and get ready. And the anxiety that you talk about, I think, was certainly present in those settings as well. And so I think you're right. It's not. It's a common experience that people go through. And I think it's a very normal process, but it's a matter of talking yourself and coaching yourself through and finding those people around you who can help encourage you and support you and reaffirm that you're on the right track.
That's one of those things with this is I really encourage you to find peers, right? Encourage students to find peers because your peers are dealing with the same thing. It might seem like everybody else has it all figured out. Everybody else is all perfect and successful, but that's not how the world works. We're all figuring it out for all of us. It's funny, this weekend I was getting supper with my grandpa's brother, and he's almost 90 years old. And he sits down at the table and he says, well, welcome, guys. Thanks for coming to celebrate with me today. And so, of course, he's just waiting for us to ask. So, all right, what are we celebrating? He said, well, it's my new record for consecutive days alive. And I looked at him and I was like, that's exactly what I'm going to tell my students next week, because this is as far as any of us has ever gotten in life. Every day is a new day. And so by having that conversation with other people, because other people are encountering this, it's you told me just there of being that grad student, that TA or GA. When I was teaching biology as a grad student, one of the students that I was teaching was a good friend of mine. Literally a year younger than me. Honestly, he might have been months younger than me. And all of a sudden I was expected to I thought I needed to have this whole new persona. I was supposed to magically be this professional, when the reality is we were literally months separated. And so it's one of those things where once I mentioned that to somebody else, they're just like, oh yeah, no, this is a common thing.
There's a lot of value in knowing, and not just knowing, because I think knowing's one thing, but understanding, appreciating that we all are going through these same very human experiences and emotions. And I think with imposter syndrome, I think that's always has helped me as I've gained more time, experience, whatever the case may be, to really understand that no matter what role people find themselves in, we're all kind of going through those same feelings and emotions and experiences, those self-doubts. And it is almost a communal thing. And to understand that and accept that, I've found that to be very helpful.
Yeah. It can be isolating too, because when you feel like you're the imposter, you don't want to mention it to anybody else, because then all of a sudden they're going to discover that you are an imposter. But it's one of those times where we just have to tell our brains to stop, right, and get out of our own way. Because if we share it, then all of a sudden you'll hear somebody else. All of a sudden you're not the imposter. Because if somebody else is also an imposter, well then, if nothing else, you're both imposters. Right. And then if you keep talking to people, you'll discover everyone is an imposter. And then who's actually like real? No one. Right. Because we're all figuring it out as we go.
We're all doing the best we can, right? Yeah. So we've talked a little bit about this, but I do want to know if you had any additional thoughts related to, we recognize imposter syndrome exists, and it's a part of really all of our lives. So what would be some other recommendations you might have to help people cope with imposter syndrome, strike that balance that allows them to be successful within whatever role they might find themselves in?
Yeah. So the first thing I'm going to talk about is identifying when it comes up. And that's easier said than done. We talk about emotional maturity, and you're supposed to understand your feelings and all of that. But sometimes it's tough for us to recognize like when those things are happening in the moment. And then afterwards we can look back and be like, oh yeah, that was obviously imposter syndrome. And so one thing I will always tell people is whenever you're going through a transition, whether that's a career transition, a big life transition, those are those moments when this can kind of creep in. Because when we're going into something new, that's when we start to figure out, oh, well, maybe I'm not supposed to be doing this, but you got it. And so that's one thing I will mention is if you're getting a new job, if you are moving to a new school, if you're taking a new class or something different, just be cognizant of that. I think that's probably the first step, is being aware of like when this typically happens. Sure. The other part of it is if you have success, take a step back and think about that success. It's good to evaluate. It's good to think, oh, what did I do well? What didn't I do well? That kind of a thing. Same with failures. You should evaluate, what did I do well? What didn't I do well? But don't dwell on those too long. That's easier said than done. Right. Sometimes you got to just jump back on that horse and get going, but evaluate, but move on. And if you need to evaluate and go to somebody else and talk to them, a supervisor, a peer, somebody else, and talk about what you want to say, because they'll help you rationalize it and help you put it into perspective. So
I don't want to cut you off. So I think you had another thought you wanted to share.
Yeah. The only other thing that I was going to say here too is, one of my general recommendations, especially when I start getting into career counseling, start talking with students about like career success, is especially in the U.S., we get so caught up in our careers. It's, our generativity. It's what we're doing. It's, for most of us, it's a large part of our identity, because we spend more time at our jobs than we typically do outside of our jobs, at least awake. Right. Well, with that, if our job isn't going well, we can start to lose sometimes confidence in who we are as a person, because we're all good people, right? At the end of the day, everybody is a good person, and we're all successful, and we all deserve to be successful. When we start maybe having some shaky foundation about our own personal confidence in who we are, especially if our identity is tied up so much into our job, and then say layoffs happen, say something else happens, that can cause us to be kind of, shook and, struggle throughout our rest of our lives. And so I always like to remind students, while it's good to have pride in your job, while it's good to have your identity in your job and have something that feels like a calling, make sure you're doing things outside of your job too. Yeah. The number one thing I would tell every single student is find a hobby. I would especially recommend finding an active hobby so that you can, take care of your own health too, because if you're not taking care of your body, you can't take care of anybody else. And find success in that, right? Sure. You want to find success, you want to grow in confidence, go run a half marathon. Almost anybody can run a half marathon. Trust me, I've done it with struggling, carrying a few extra pounds a few times there. And I remember standing there at the starting line of a half marathon and being like, oh, I can't do this. I'm going to struggle. I'm not going to be able to get through it. And then you get done at the end and, hey, I did that. I accomplished it. Right. And then it was one of those moments where you look back on it and you remember, oh, hey, I found confidence. I found success in this that I was intimidated with. And just holding on to that kind of a nugget is something to remember. You can bring that with in the rest of your life, right? If you were able to run through that finish line or run up that hill, well, then you can run up that hill and work too. and you deserve to be successful. And it's tough to say, oh, it's a fluke for me to accomplish that when you have the medal hanging on your wall. And so that's one of those things where whether it's a marathon, whether it's rock climbing or, whatever you're doing, go out and just make sure you're doing stuff with your personal life too, because that's going to make you a better employee, a better, more confident individual, and just a more well-rounded person.
Right. I love that. I love that. So if I'm a student and I want to or a faculty member and I want to find out a little bit more information, or I want to find somebody that I can talk to about this, what resources are there available here at SDSU or even outside of SDSU that can help support me as I kind of navigate this imposter syndrome that might be affecting me?
Yeah, so we talk to peers. I think that's a really good one, especially with this specific instance of imposter syndrome, because if you discover your peers are also in that same boat, then it really does alleviate a lot of that. That being said, I remember being a grad student, and I remember how little time I had to take care of myself because of how much I was working, how much I was focused on school, and it just drains you mentally as a grad student. And so if I had talked to my peers, we were all struggling. Well, that turns into a bit of an echo chamber. Right. And so sometimes you got to find somebody outside of your normal day-to-day to talk to. Friends who are doing different things, that's a great one. Family who's doing different things, that's a great one too. And so that's kind of the basics of where I would start there. Sure. I will say though, with imposter syndrome, because it ties in so closely to anxiety, because it ties in so closely with eventually depression will affect this too. Right. And that kind of a conversation, it can be a lot to have. And that's where I would really recommend contacting like the counseling center here on campus. They're the ones who are really going to be the professionals in helping you just kind of get your head on straight, as I'd say, right? Because that's one of those things is they're here to support us. And they're really friendly. They're definitely here and they're available. It used to be, I heard when I was a student, they never have time. They don't have enough people. Right. That is not the case anymore. We have there's no wait list. We have such a phenomenal program over there now. I'm so proud of what they've done there. And so go and talk to them. They can be a really great support, especially if you're feeling like it's starting to get to be like, that anxiety level where it's really starting to almost like make you freeze, right? Trigger that fight or flight response. The other one I'm going to say is look online, right? Look online. The internet is both an amazing thing. It's also a truly terrible thing too at times. Right. But if you go online, it's funny. I was looking up some stuff for this here today. I don't know if you ever go on Reddit.
A little bit, yeah.
I go on Reddit. I follow way too much college football, way too much NFL stuff on Reddit. I agree. And I was going on there, I was just searching, and I found threads on threads of people talking about imposter syndrome and giving their examples and talking about, confidence in their jobs and their work. And that's both great because you can see other people. While it's strangers on the internet, it's just lines on a screen. Be careful. Always get into, the garbage that you see in the comments and stuff there. But like even outside of that, if we're looking like more like actual professional, solid resources, well, there's the Imposter Syndrome Institute. They have a website. It's dedicated to imposter syndrome. It ties really closely with a lot of some counseling resources too that are out there as well. And it does a really good job of directing you. Has a quiz about, are you maybe experiencing this, right? Like, are you an imposter when it comes to the imposter syndrome? I've gotten that question before. That being said, those resources out there can be a really great thing if you engage with them. There's a ton of books. There's a ton of articles. And just knowing that there's other people that have gone through this really does help you feel like, it's all right if I do feel like the imposter, because we're all imposters.
Right. So as we're nearing the end of our time, but I always like to end with this question, especially on topics such as imposter syndrome and professionals who maybe navigated it and are gaining their own reality on the conversation. But if you could go back, as we wrap up here, if you could go back and talk to 18-year-old Stephen, what's that piece of advice you would give yourself? Maybe in general, maybe related to imposter syndrome, maybe they're connected, but what's that piece of advice you would give yourself as you begin that journey that's taken you to the State of Wellbeing podcast today?
When I think about coming in, starting college, right, going in initially there as a student, I always think back to a couple conversations an advisor who was trying to really be supportive. He's really trying to motivate everybody in our class and tell us, hey, you might have done really well in high school, but you need to go on and keep pushing yourself to be successful in college. However, what I heard when he said that was, hey, you might have been really smart in your hometown, your small little school.
But you're in a new world now.
Yep. Well, I graduated with a class of 15, and coming from that to SDSU was crazy. And it felt like I was not supposed to be here. Everybody I met in the first couple of days, it just was a fluke. Everybody I met happened to have over a 30 on the ACT. Their dads were all doctors. It was a complete fluke.
I was a first gen coming off the farm in Millbank, South Dakota, coming to SDSU, and it was a shock to the system. Yeah.
And so then all of a sudden I started thinking of, well, maybe I'm not supposed to be here. And I remember thinking, I got my first grade back. I got an A on my first biology exam. I really liked biology. I was a biology student. And all my peers did too. And I was thinking, well, maybe it's just a fluke. Maybe I wasn't, they did this because they're smart. I did it just because, I happened to maybe have something else in the past. And I started making excuses for my success because it felt like I didn't belong. Sure. Even though my friends were all super supportive, we're all really close, it just felt like I was the outlier. Yeah. Well, it wasn't until years later that I actually ever said that out loud to somebody. Right. And every single one of my friends, they all said the exact same thing. Even though they all came from Sioux Falls or they came from bigger cities, they all had that exact same scenario of, oh yeah, it felt like I was just barely getting by. Even though to my eyes, they were way smarter than I was. But it's one of those things where you got to just tell yourself, hey, if you're thinking that this is an issue, talk to people, right? It's all right to have weakness. And I think that's probably the biggest thing I would say is talk, right? If you don't understand something, if you have, feel like you have some sort of a weakness, if you feel like you're struggling with something, talk to people and share it, because if you don't share it, nobody can support you. And that's what, that's what we're here to do on campus is, we're not expecting students to be perfect, but we're going to help you grow while you're here. But we can't help you grow if you don't tell us what you need.
Right. So I love that. Before we wrap up and go, Stephen, where can I find you? If I wanted to have an additional conversation or just come get your perspective on all the things that you do here at SDSU, where are you located?
Yeah, the Office of Career Development. We are in the Student Union, in 136 in the Student Union.
Nicest office on campus, in my opinion, by the way. I tell you what, you did a nice job setting that space up.
I wish I could take credit for decorating, but you don't want me decorating.
You don't want me decorating either, so.
We'll let someone else do that.
There you go.
So, yeah, students can come in. We're here 12 months out of the year. For the most part, we work on an appointment-based model. So students, they can schedule appointments with us on our website. That's careers.sdstate.edu. You can find any of that. If you just Google Careers SD State, you'll find it on the web too as well. We have tons of resources on there. And then we do both in-person, but we also do virtual appointments too as well. So students, if they're gone over the summer, we can do a Zoom meeting. We also work with all alumni for free forever. And so that's another cool thing I always like to share. And I do mean that. I worked with a woman yesterday who is applying to department head level jobs at a university, big universities, right? Compared to even what we're doing here. And she graduated years ago, but still is reaching out and working with us. Talk about imposter syndrome, trying to help somebody in that kind of a shoe. That can be a bit of a challenge there, but we're here to support, right? And we can be a second set of eyes. We can be a confidence boost. We can help with, preparing for an interview, help you just talk through whatever's going on. And so students can always reach out to us there. They can access all of our resources online, or if they just stop in, I bet one of us is going to be available to at least have a conversation to point you with how to schedule appointments with us, even if we can't necessarily handle it right there at that time.
Well, I love that. Thank you so much for coming in today and being a part of this conversation. I think it's a really important topic, and I really value that perspective, and especially that idea of, talk to others and realize that we're all going through that very human experience, and imposter syndrome is really a part of that human experience. And I appreciated you talking about how, 5 years after, the fact of feeling these things, you talk to your friends and you were all going through it. And I think that's such an important thing for everyone to realize is we're all going through that human experience. And so I just want to, again, thank you for coming in today. Thank you for being a part of the podcast.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, no, definitely. And so thank you all for tuning in today. Thank you for joining us for another episode of the State of Wellbeing podcast.
Thank you for listening to this episode of State of Wellbeing, a podcast from South Dakota State University. This podcast is brought to you by the Mental Wellbeing Team and SD State Health.